So that's all cool. So today, if the computer cooperates, we're going to do our last lecture. Just remember, our final session is not mandatory if you have a conflict or for whatever reason. I have ordered from Amazon a copy of Jurassic World. And they promised to get it here by May 2nd, which is like, what, a week after? No. But some folks have suggested that they would be able to bring a copy from Blockbuster. So, but it's still up to you guys. It's a democracy, so majority rules whatever movie you'd like to watch. I don't see the philosophical relevance of Jurassic World, actually. Although the problem, of course, is easily resolved. You watch the movie and then you say, oh, well, obviously, dinosaurs are people too. And you can get into all sorts of, do dinosaurs go to heaven? If so, how safe is it for the rest of us? That would be a concern, right? Welcome to heaven. Oh. I didn't realize going to heaven meant I was going to be food for other creatures. That's
technically that is their heaven.
It's like that movie about dog heaven.
All dogs go to heaven. Unless they're Dobermans. Dobermans, especially if their name is Diabolo, are not allowed into.
I'll make sure to give it Doberman.
Wow.
Poor dog.
Actually, Dobermans can be very nice dogs, provided you teach them not to eat your friends. If you train them to eat your friends, then they're not really that friendly. Especially in packs of Dobermans. So this is our last session except for the final. And again, you don't have to come to that. We have no class on Tuesday. I know a lot of you think I don't have any class, but that's so our double session does in fact start at 7. I double checked all the references, and that's exactly when they say we're supposed to be here. So sorry about that, folks. But if you're up that early in the morning, I'm not sure pizza is the right food for that. Donuts, maybe. I'll bring the donut holes. Those are easy to get. In fact, I have some with me right now.
My friend used to say that.
Donut holes are less than nothing, which brings me to this little book. Sometimes less than nothing is actually something. In fact, that's the whole point of this naked lady with her butt sticking in your face, climbing over the red line. The red line is the universe, and she's kind of climbing out of the universe. So nothingness actually includes something. So less than nothing is. If you'd like. That's one of Slavoj Žižek's books. By the way, I highly recommend, if you're interested in Žižek, not to buy any of his books. I mean, you're certainly welcome to if you're wealthy and you feel like donating to the cause. But actually, almost everything he's ever written is very repetitious. So if you get a hold of 2 or 3 of his things, you've basically read all of it. In fact, if you watch one or the other of his YouTube videos, you pretty much can watch all of it in a few hours. because he pretty much says the same sorts of things over and over again. But they are very interesting things, and he is, I think, an example of perhaps the a perfect example of the continental European philosophical point of view today. So if you're curious about our neighbors in the EU and the way they think, he's among the elite of that group. In fact, he teaches at the graduate school, same one that Alain Badiou teaches at, and some others. And it is actually quite interesting. But the thing is, it's all on the web, so you can go on the web and find pretty much everything he's written. And if you do buy the books as he publishes them, they come from a press which publishes lots of things of the same sort by other authors as well. And Žižek does not actually collect any of the money, the royalties or anything from his books. All of it by contract he donates to the company, the publishing company, which then in turn uses the money to sponsor all sorts of student organizations, and I'm not sure what all things they donate to, but they're very politically active, liberal, socialist organization. So all the money goes to all those causes. So Žižek, I'm sure, is wealthy enough that he doesn't care where the money goes. So he's like a good guy that way, I suppose. He lives in a crappy little apartment in his hometown, where he's always lived, actually. Although, of course, he travels a lot. But for the most part, if people interview him, they interview him in this crappy little apartment in former Yugoslavia, where he's, I'll pass these around too. I should really check the bookmarkers. This looks like I stole it from a library, but actually not. It was kicked out of the library. You know how they do? And then Amazon sells it for not really that cheap, actually. The new books, for some reason, were still quite expensive. That was weird.
I like this guy's bio in the back.
Yes, he writes books and will die. He was born, he writes books, and will die. That's his whole bio. Did I remember the whole thing? That's pretty easy to remember, actually. There's not a whole lot to it. So, here's my last presentation. I actually gave this to our department. We had every once in a while we try to all get together because our department members all like philosophy, believe it or not. You know, they really do. And they're all doing their own research and stuff. And every once in a while we get together and have our own little get-together where we can share the kinds of things we're doing. And on this particular occasion, one of our members who's no longer with us, he's moved on to a small college in the Midwest, was doing a presentation on Heidegger, so I took as my start-off point Heidegger. So I've never had this formatted very well for a presentation. So Heidegger, who's Heidegger? Did we talk about Heidegger a little bit? I think I showed some video clips of Heidegger in Germany. He's one that you can actually still see on YouTube. Before he died, he was videoed a couple different times. Did I show you one of him? Anybody remember? Herr Professor Heidegger. Did I show this?
I think so. drängt heute ins Äußerste. Das Verhältnis des Menschen zur Sprache ist in einer Wandlung begriffen, deren Tragweite wir noch nicht ermessen. Der Verlauf dieser Wandlung lässt sich auch nicht unmittelbar aufhalten. Er geht über.
So Heidegger was a student of Husserl. I think that was the connection I made. Became a professor, of course, in the German system. Eventually became the Hauptprofessor for the Third Reich, and was the one responsible for firing a lot of the Jewish professors because they were Jewish, including Husserl, his own mentor. So that was like an incredible slight for him, for his own mentor to fire him. Within 2 years, he ended up fleeing for his life to Switzerland once he realized that he thought he was going to be the brains behind the Nazi operation and could control Hitler. After 2 years in his position, he realized that there was no controlling Hitler and that things were not going to go well. So he fled to Switzerland, where he stayed until the end of the war. At the end of the war, World War II, he returned to Germany, where he was arrested, put on trial for his pro-Nazi activities as rector of the university system, and sent to jail for, I think, about 6 years. When he was released, he went back to teaching, which a lot of people thought, wow, that's totally wrong, but actually he's still considered a very important philosopher, and so he continued to teach until basically the end of his life, and write as well. And so he's considered really one of the most important. Alain Badiou, in the beginning of his first book, which is Being an Event, which I guess is, here's the set. This is actually a 2-volume set between the two of these. But in his first one, he starts off by saying that Heidegger was probably the most important philosopher of the 20th century. So that's high praise, of course. And what's especially his concern? Well, now if we look at the niche that he fits into, the book that he wrote that really kind of solidified his position, and it was one that he wrote very young, actually, was Sein und Zeit, or Being and Time, right? Being and Time, as it's translated in English. And it fits into a sequence. So we could take it all the way back to Aristotle. Aristotle's metaphysics, literally, begins the concept of being, what being is. And being, for Aristotle, is all physical things, everything, right? By the time we get to Hegel, which is really, as I suggested when we talked about Hegel, he's like the jumping off point into the modern template, where we see evolution, becoming, process, the world as kind of an organism, a growing organism rather than the mechanistic universe concept. That's what Hegel does. And Hegel especially does that in his book, The Logic, The Greater Logic. He's got several logic books, but the big one, the greater one, is the one that's referenced this way, where he basically describes from the beginning how being unfolds, right? And being and nothingness are together, right? So they work together as kind of an evolutionary process. So in a sense, what we see with these kinds of metaphysics books is an attempt to describe in relatively small space, really, the picture of the entire universe and how we can conceive of it, from the very small to the very large, how our understanding fits into that. In other words, these are the books that basically explain everything. Right? So I mean, obviously, if you want to get into specifics like, why are some people bipolar, right? What you want to do is, of course, narrow your subject area into psychology, etc. And the interesting thing, though, is there's a big picture that they're offering here within which, say, psychologists would be able to work, right? So this is the big picture. These books are an attempt to give you the big picture where everything else basically can fit into it as, aspects of that big picture. So Hegel's logic gives us an attempt to do this. Being and Time by Heidegger is an attempt to follow up on Hegel's logic, to modernize it, and especially to recognize what's happened in continental Europe that confuses everyone, and that is the recognition that language is the kind of the Kantian structure through which we perceive phenomena, and language is dynamic and changing, right? So, and it doesn't give us that mirror of nature, it's, philosophy in the mirror of nature, as Rorty points out, right? Language isn't giving us the absolute mirror image of the way reality is. It restructures it. In fact, it gives us a lot more than nature really offers. All those abstractions that we have are not actually there in nature. We're very creative ourselves when we come up with those things, right? They're not actually there. Mathematics is not out there. We invent the thing and then use it in order to explore phenomena, right? And so wow, I mean, it's, of course there are a lot of mathematicians that would like to say reality is mathematics, but the correct way to approach that really would be to say is one of the most impressive tools we have to examine our reality is mathematics. But it is a tool, it's something that we create, and it's evolving itself, as Philip Kitcher, I think I mentioned in his books on philosophy of mathematics, literally describes mathematics not as this one-to-one correspondence with the reality, which we've gradually discovered, and that's enabled us to deal with reality very well. Instead, mathematics is actually an ongoing, dialectical, evolving, symbolic system, just as all of our human languages are, and we refine the tool as we need in order to do even more work that we think up. It really isn't part of nature. Absolutely amazing. So Heidegger gives us this book, Being and Time. So Heidegger should be considered important for that reason. And so they're talking primarily of descriptions of being, especially as we'll see in the work of Alain Badiou. Nate Silver, I'll just show you the link, one of the interesting books that's out there, The Signal and the Noise, Why So Many Predictions Fail But Some Don't. So that's kind of interesting. He's famous for predicting previous he was the one that predicted that Obama was easily going to win against Mitt Romney. Remember, an awful lot of people just thought, well, Mitt Romney's going to win. And Mitt Romney was like, hey, what happened? I thought I was going to win. And he didn't. So Nate Silver and other math nerds, that's the election results I'm talking about there is Obama's second election. So the odd aspect of this controversy was that many were upset with the numbers and predictions that these amalgamators, Nate Silver is an amalgamator, basically dealing with like metadata, from all sorts of polls and things. That's what he did. He gathered not just one poll, but he took all the polls together. Basically, you applied, an algorithm to figure, so Obama's going to win. So he's right. So these amalgamators had come to because they were contrary to the heart's desire. So a lot of people have a particular hope for things, and that hope clouds their vision because you hope things are going to work out. But what you really have to do is check the math, because the math is accurate. The math will If you think about it, we really should be using a lot more math in a lot more of the things we vote on, so that we look at, say, the problem that we have with the budget. We listen to all the folks from ICER that have been trying to instruct the population that are voting and you know, and encouraging the legislature to vote a certain way. And ICER has been increasingly frustrated because they have the math. The math is very, very clear exactly what our best solutions, our best choices ought to be, and everyone's just basically ignoring that because of their heart. That, oh, I don't want to be taxed. I don't want to become a part of a taxing organization, etc. So in an interesting sense, the mathematics of their approach seems to pose a contrast to the emotional attachment to our hopes and our expectations. But it turns out that the numbers do not lie, and so there is a psychological distance in their approach and the more warm-hearted approach of most Americans. This kind of suggests that cold calculations have a bad rap in America. This is also a point made by Philip Kitcher. I think I reference his Science in a Democratic Society, and the problem he sees is that, well, you know, when you have a voting population that actually can make the major decisions, but that population is basically unscientific in its desires, and so they basically ignore what scientists who are specialists in whatever decision they're making tell them. Okay, so if you do this, this will happen. If you do this, this will happen, etc. But the population doesn't like those, so they ignore it, and then they do things that are basically just going to screw things up worse, right? So an interesting problem for us is when you have a clear scientific community that basically understands situations much better than the general population, how can we revise democracy so that those scientists basically can inform that population so that the choices the population makes are actually going to work and not totally screw things up? So this is an interesting, relatively recent discussion. So more of the decisions made by a democratic society need to be made by specialists who actually know and understand the facts. Can you imagine that argument going over in our community? It basically suggests that well, you could think about, you know, exactly what that means. Really, it means that your choices are going to be limited by the scientists who tell you these are the realistic possibilities here. You know, you may want to do such and such, but you know what? That's just really dumb. It won't work. Do the math. Yeah, but most people don't do the math. So in short, math again should rule, at least in some places and situations. Alain Badiou, I'm really going to highlight today, because he's living lots of books. I read St. Paul. That was pretty interesting, actually. He really writes so much that you can't read all of his stuff. I think he's like writing faster than people can read. But as you can see, he's not just writing the big book that basically gives you the entire picture. He's writing lots of other books about very specific things in that picture. Right? By the way, the logical worlds and being an event were written in the 80s. So they're more than 30-some years old, actually, in the French. I think the English is much more recent, but you get the idea? He writes a lot. And of course, there's lots of folks writing about it. This is the French title of Being, Lettre, and Event. So he suggests that the main element in the modern movement of philosophy was the mathematization. Did I say that right? Mathematization. Now I can't say it again. Shoot. That's the way life is sometimes. That word, though. Mathematization of truth. But that by Hegel there was a movement away from math that is described by Heidegger as die Poetisch, as he says. But what Badiou emphasizes in his work is movement back to mathematics as central to our understanding of being, and this ends up being the central focus of what he calls events. They, in short, seem to be mathematical sets. So, I don't know if I've explained this here in this class or not, but basically, and you can see how this fits with Quine, when Quine says in word and object that words are basically the concepts within meaningful space. They're integrated with all the other meanings in our language in that particular form of life, in that language game that we're playing, and integrated that way. So a word doesn't have meaning by itself in no context whatsoever. It only makes sense within a context where it's interconnected with other words that have meaning in that context as well, right? But those concepts can be viewed as sets. So what we might have called the universal, everything that's a horse, we're essentially talking about the sets of everything that we call that particular word in that particular environment, etc. And notice that those sets are interrelated then with other sets. So you've got so it's a mathematization of meaning, essentially, which, by the way, works really well if you're doing computer things, trying to do analyses of what people are thinking, using like various Google tools and things that are all applicable to meta information, metadata. Another interesting author that I've mentioned several times is dead, died in his 60s years ago, Stephen Jay Gould. He shares a secret rooted in general human foibles and in the faint tinge of anti-intellectualism that has always pervaded American culture with us in his introduction to Leonardo's Mountain of Clams and the Diet of Worms, which is an absolutely hilarious book, at least as far as I've gotten. I think I've gotten to page 6. But it's hilarious, as far as I've gotten. Very few people, including authors willing to commit to paper, ever really read primary sources. Certainly not in necessary depth and completion, and often not at all. That's on page 6. And notice that's as far as I've read in that book. So that could be considered funny. That's a joke, right? Because here I am not reading the whole source. But oh my goodness, I have been reading his the structure of evolutionary theory. It's a monstrous, fascinating history of evolutionary theory. It also reminds me of G.K. Chesterton, who's famous for writing his biography of Thomas Aquinas. Is said to have ordered a pile of books to study. It's like he had a maid, and he said to the maid, "Go to the library, get all the books you could find on Thomas Aquinas." And she brought them back to him. You know, imagine just a couple bags, or whatever. So he started to read them. He read only a few pages in the first book, and then he sat down and he said, "Oh, the heck with it," and he wrote his biography of Aquinas, which is like considered the best book on Aquinas. And yet, actually, he doesn't really go into detail at all because he doesn't know the details. But nonetheless, it's still considered one of the best books on the saint.
What? That's
thought, I just checked these links yesterday, and they all work. So let's see. So it is a great book, too, though. He keeps pointing out that it is only meant to be a rough sketch, which is all that it is. But even more hilarious is Slavoj Žižek's Less Than Nothing. And voila, here it is. Can you believe he's got this naked lady with her butt sticking over the red line? It took me about 100, 200 pages in before he finally explained why that was there. I've shown you some of Slavoj Žižek, right? Let me.
Just a second.
Examine Life, I guess, is one of the. Have I shown you this one before? I don't want to.
Oh, the trash one, yeah. you did
Yes,
show
I did show this one. Oh,
Because he dresses like
this is where he says shit
Well,
doesn't actually disappear.
feeling
It-
at home.
Goes into canalization
Part
canals.
of our daily perception of reality is that this disappears from our world. When you go to the toilet, shit disappears. You flush it. Of course, rationally, you know it's there in canalization and so on.
Canalization.
But it is a
I
matter
love
of
that.
your most
We never would say
elementary experience. It disappears from your world.
Wow.
But the problem is that trash doesn't disappear. I think ecology, the way we approach ecological problematic is maybe the crucial field of
I
ideology.
don't know
and I use
which
ideology
language English
in the
is for him.
traditional
Probably
sense
his
of
fifth, but I'm not sure.
illusory, wrong way of
But I've heard him
perceiving
in interviews
reality.
where he's speaking
Why? Ideology
in
is not simply
Serbian,
dreaming
his
about
native
false
language,
ideas and so
and
on.
it was kind of pleasing actually because just remember I was a Russian linguist, and listening to it, Serbian is a Russian, so it's like listening to kind of German versus English. It's close enough you can follow what's going on.
When something horrible happens,
But he studied in France, so I'm sure, and his French is good, his German is good.
It must mean something, you know, like AIDS. It was a trauma, then conservatives came and said...
This is his apartment.
For our
So you can see that he lives in a crappy
now
little
you
joint.
stopped. Now we can say long live Stalin or what. We are not recorded there.
Slavoj Žižek is a big, friendly Slovenian Marxist intellectual who spends as much time blathering on about Batman films as he does about
Did I say
hate.
Serbia
He's
and
written about
Slovenia?
75 books,
They're all the
most of which
same.
remain
I've
impenetrable
never been
me.
to any of them.
But it's his public appearances,
sure they're all-
both at lectures and at events like Occupy Wall Street, which have really cemented his position as the most broadly popular anti-capitalist philosopher working today. This is because, unlike pretty much every other anti-capitalist philosopher, he actually has a sense of humor. His latest project is a film, The Pervert's Guide to Ideology,
That's an
directed by
old-
Sophie Fiennes.
That's
In
an
it,
old-
Slav uses Hollywood blockbusters to explain why the bulk of us remain so enthralled to capitalist power structures that we cannot even escape them in our sleep. I wanted to know why I was such a sheeple, so I went to
A
Slovenia
sheeple?
to meet the man.
A sheeple instead of a people, a sheeple.
You hate life.
Because you're like a sheep instead of a peep.
Whatever. So we go my place there. No?
Amazing. But when you're in town here,
Shall we go my place?
fans or something like that.
What do you
They're
mean by
walking
saying
on the street
people
to
hate
his
me pretty much
apartment.
here? I'm not kidding. I wasn't for independent Slovenia. I didn't care about that. I also didn't have any Yugoslav nostalgia. Many leftists
So
have it.
it was all
They
Yugoslavia,
consider me
but
a
when it
traitor there.
broke up,
My nostalgia is for the old times 40 years ago when I was young. You know, even phones were not used so much. This was nice because once a day in the morning, both arrived, and that was it. Yeah, then you know you are free for 24 hours.
I noticed you've got Joe Stalin.
This is just so that it, not, I don't mean you personally, idiots when they enter the flat ask me why do you have that. It's strictly for this.
It's just to annoy people.
absolutely just to annoy people.
I've read on the front
No,
of your books it's
he
quoted
actually
you were the most dangerous
thinks of Stalin as a
philosopher in
hero.
the West. You don't seem very dangerous to me.
Here I must disappoint you. You know, I am this type of a Joker guy. I mean, Joker from Batman. You know.
Yeah, I know.
I laugh and so on, but I can be a Stalinist. If you give me power, I know how to use it. That's why I'm afraid almost of myself. I don't want power. I'm extremely sensitive. It's beautiful that you were on time there.
Yeah.
You know, even in love relations, you know what's my motto? I quote Lacan. When he says, my fiancée is never late for an appointment because the moment she is late, she's no longer my fiancée. Thanks to the attitude. You know what's one of my tricks? I like it. When I give a talk, or especially if it's a debate, it's good to begin on time or even a little bit earlier. Because then people who are even on time or 2 minutes late feel a little bit guilty, you know.
Why do you want them to feel guilty? Just so
Because they don't ask stupid, annoying questions. I hate debates. People think that I like to give talks. No, I like to write.
If you don't like giving talks, how do you feel about making films? Because obviously the Pervert's Guide to Ideology is coming out. That's
Now you
what we're talking
touched
about.
a very dramatic point. I'm disgusted just looking at myself on screen. So it's not some kind of a extravaganza to say, I saw neither Pervert's Guides to Cinema nor this one Pervert's Guide to Ideology. I'm too horrified at looking at myself on screen. Ordinary Americans, as ordinary people in all countries, have a multitude of fears. We fear all kinds of things. We fear maybe immigrants or people whom we perceive as lower than ourselves, attacking us,
Jaws.
robbing us. In Steven
We're going to need a
Spielberg's
bigger boat.
Jaws, the function of the shark is to unite all these fears so that we can, in a way, trade all these fears for one fear alone.
Why is
So he
cinema
just
so
ruined that
difficult
movie for you if you're...
when you try to analyze the world?
Mostly the way I talk about cinema is simply to use it to illustrate where we are today ideologically. How do we experience our lives? What do we find worth
Jurassic
fighting for?
World.
What's the meaning of our life? Or smaller equal, you have to look at Hollywood, where you get it in
Hollywood.
distilled form.
Hey, buddy.
Or,
You gonna pay for that or what? Look, buddy, I don't want no house today. Either pay for it or put it back.
Well, your film starts with a clip from They Live, the John Carpenter movie, which is a great movie. If we were able to put on those glasses,
Yeah.
what do you think would happen? If everyone in the world suddenly put on the They Live glasses, what would the next day be like?
It will be the end of ideology. I mean, I claim that. Okay, I will give you one example. A typical boss no longer wants to be a boss. You know, imagine these postmodern companies like some digital programming company, creative agency. A boss comes in jeans, embraces you with all vulgarities. Did you have a good fuck last night? Whatever. But you, then he remains a boss. He nonetheless gives orders. But the social game is you have to pretend that we are friends and so on. In these relations, the first step to liberation is to force him to really behave like a boss. To tell him, no, fuck you, no comradeship, treat me as a boss, give me explicitly orders and so on. Sorry, seriously, can I give you some fucking fruit juice or Coke?
some fucking fruit juice.
Coke, iced tea. So here it's included the cancer you get because it's zero, which means instead of sugar you get all those sweeteners.
Some films that you seem to be pretty interested in, although very quick.
so, Slavoj Žižek, very interesting. Be aware though, if you watch him for too long, you start getting the same tick that he has, and you start pronouncing words like he does, you know, like film. You don't say film anymore, you say film, which is, you know, so, or it could be, I don't know. You pick up stuff like that? So, the interesting thing in this book is at one particular point, I think it was around 250. I don't think I underlined it. But somewhere in there he says the most interesting book reviews that he reads are reviews written by people that haven't actually read the book. And of course, at that point, I was wondering, well, now, so maybe I shouldn't read any further? Because I would ruin my interpretation of the book by having read it. Kind of an odd sort of thing. I don't remember why. I put that there, I think, mostly for my colleagues, that in case they didn't know that I had that there. That's hilarious. And by the way, you can actually make money reading books even if they are by Hegel. I suppose. I make money. I don't know if that's something that everyone can use as a... So you can read this stuff and it's not like a waste of time. It's not a complete waste of time, which is a game by Monty Python, by the way. It's a complete waste of time. I think they made a movie too. So we should start with the logic, and you can go and look at Hegel's logic. Lots of places on the web. You don't actually have to buy the book, of course. This is an actual book you'd have to buy if you wanted that copy, but you can just read the logic on the web. And so if we're looking at a specific spot in their being and nothingness, or rather Zizek in his book explains that, and I don't think this worked really well. I just had a link to it. Did I ever tell you what the Owl of Minerva is a reference to? Minerva is another name for Athena. Athena is the Greek, and Minerva is the Latin version of Athena. So basically the goddess of wisdom. And the metaphor of the owl, they actually have owls in Athens that are relatively unique to that area. So they're little owls. So they're kind of famous. They still have them. They're there. They're basically birds that are from that area. They're owls, little ones, and so of course they're referred to as the owls of Minerva. But the metaphor is that philosophy always understands things at the twilight of the day. So shit happens during the day. We don't understand it. By evening, we reinterpret it, and now we feel like we understand it. But that wisdom comes at twilight, or when it's too late for us to do anything. So that's what the Owl of Minerva as a metaphor is all about.
Wait, where are the owls?
Pardon?
Where are the owls from? They're from
Athens. I think I should be able to find them.
But I thought Minerva was the Roman.
Pardon?
I thought Minerva was the Roman way of saying.
Right.
Yeah, but
I don't know why they
why not?
So these are really ancient coins. So the owls have been there for quite some time. Do we not have any actual pictures of the owls though? There should be like. Here's one. So they actually have. Or is that a what? Well, crap. It looks like an owl, but. Well, in any case. So it says little owl. By the way, be careful. We have the predator birds are back. I noticed that this morning when I let the chihuahuas out, there was a hawk sitting there in a tree. I got my binoculars. By the time I came back, the hawk was gone. But we've had mated pairs in our neighborhood before. They're the the smallest ones. They mostly prey on other birds, little birds, songbirds. It's really discouraging to see them sitting there tearing apart a poor little bird. Like, I saw it eating a robin in my tree, and I'm like, oh, we love the robins, and there it is, just destroying. However, for Heidegger, Dasein is a word that he made up. It's a combination of sein, being, right? An entity in that case, right? And da drüber, right? That there, right? So Dasein is being there. And that's what you are. You're being and you're there. It's kind of like the Descartes conception of I think, therefore I am, so I'm thinking, and that puts me here, right? So for Heidegger, Dasein is that you're thinking, and that makes you there, right? Kind of an interesting way of thinking. Pardon?
I'm looking up Dawkins now.
Oh, cool. Oh, okay, so that's the video that I showed already. You can look up, so this is one of those tools that Google gives you. This is the Ngram viewer where you can plug in any words you're interested in and see how often they come up. I've actually changed the date on this, and I think the most recent though is to 2008. But it doesn't significantly change the graph. And notice being less than nothing is not showing up at all. Or which one? Oh, so I don't have being in nothingness, being an event, being in time. Which one is not showing up? Being in nothingness, being in time. So being in nothingness is not showing up. That's really strange. Let me change that and put that shows up. Oh, it's case sensitive. Shoot. Oh. Well. Shoot. But you get the idea. You could play with it and put all sorts of things in, like oops, I need a comma. So Madonna gets lots and lots of recognition. English, no one notices Elysée. I don't know why that is. Now the interesting thing is, if you go back to 1820, which Madonna are they talking about, right? If you look at 1903, etc., 1930, that's clearly not the same Madonna, but once we get this rise in fame here, I bet you what we're talking about is, whoa, that's interesting. So Ngram viewer. But there are other tools. I don't know if you've researched what Google makes possible for you to do, like for metadata research. There's all kinds of stuff there, which is something that you're going to start doing, I'm sure, in research papers and things. You're going to start harvesting all that metadata as part of your daily research with me. Figure out what's going on. So, but being in nothingness is Jean-Paul Sartre. So Heidegger's book, Being and Time, inspired Sartre to write what he thought of as his, well, it's his major work, and it was, he meant a companion book to Heidegger's book. Of course, we can actually think of Heidegger as an existentialist. Dasein is clearly an existential kind of motif, right? So the focus for you is being there. You're in your environment, in your linguistic environment, your physical environment, right? Your existence is, Dasein. For Sartre, what you have is the two-part Hegelian motif of the in itself and the for itself. So remember in the master-servant section of the phenomenology that we looked at, the relationship between the subject that is having the experience and the conception that that subject has of itself that it's related to, the for itself, right, is a constant dialectical process. So you're constantly engaged in thinking about who you are, what you should be doing, and so on and so forth. What Sartre spends most of his time in this book talking about is that actual relationship, and he comes up with some really interesting things as a result. One of my favorite quotes is, I am what I am not, and I am not what I am. So I am this conception of myself, but I'm not that. I'm never one with that because my subjective side is not that. That's just an abstract conception of me that I think of as me, but it's never actually me. There's always that gap between the en soi and the pour soi, right? The in itself and the for itself, right? So I actually exist as this relationship between both of them, a kind of an abstract higher level, and not just the subject side. I am really that conception of myself. So I am what I am not, and I am not what I am, right? So there's this constant dialectical construction going on, this dialectical process between this inner self and the self as it's conceived by the self. And Sartre comes up with a magnificent suggestion at this point and points out that the gap between that, the in itself and the for itself, is what? Nothingness. There's nothing there. There's nothing that makes that gap filled. So it's a complete nothingness between the in itself and the for itself. So being is everything, and nothingness is this gap that's a result of human consciousness, thinking of itself as a self, right? So nothingness enters into the world like a worm coiled in the heart of being, he says. He is French, really very negative kind of connotations. But I can understand an awful lot of why that would be, because he was born prior to World War I, was a kid through that, but then as an adult in World War II was on the French opposition. He was a guerrilla for the French, but captured, thrown into jail. But even while he was in jail by the Nazis, he actually wrote plays. One of the plays he wrote was called The Frogs, which was a joke about the Nazi regime. And the German censors allowed it to be performed. So they must have really enjoyed it. So I think of the censors as kind of German intellectuals that probably didn't think very highly of the Nazi regime themselves. So it's kind of interesting. He was also a high school teacher on the coast of Normandy, but eventually becomes a professor in Paris, where he, of course, meets Simone de Beauvoir. So they're both famous, and they were not married, but they were. Yeah, that's their apartment. Cigarettes all over the place, as you can see. Are we actually gonna?
Boulevard Raspail, à 2 pas de la coupole et d'un parc brûlant, dit Jean-Paul Sartre, l'écrivain le plus connu et le plus controversé de son temps. Cette chambre austère représente une espèce de conscience universelle.
I guess he's dead by the time they made this.
Cubains, Vietnamiens, étudiants sollicitent dans leur lutte l'appui de Sartre.
Aren't they gonna have?
Personnage public, Sartre pourtant ne s'entoure que de quelques personnes.
So we're
La
gonna do
Maison
something.
Blanche avec les septembre. Ah, ici, mais vous allez voir, là-bas, on dit que c'est là. Ici, c'est là. On va dire.
Sartre résident, tout toujours en majeure majesté, je veux dire que tous les amis sont à Montparnasse.
Oui, d'abord, j'ai habité l'autre côté. Alors, je suis déjà très depuis que nous Avant de
36 ans, les deux écrivains se
C'est bon.
voient tous les jours. Ils sont en couple.
She was a feminist writer.
Et à la fois très libres.
Her most famous book is The Second Sex.
Mais surtout, parce qu'ils se sont voués au travail, ils ont instauré dans leur vie une organisation de pairs. Tous les matins, chacun travaille seul de son côté.
So sit down and write something that photographer said. Look studious.
Depuis près de 10 ans, Sartre prépare un essai sur Flaubert, où il tente de faire une synthèse, et c'est en ce
I
moment
remember as a kid thinking how odd it was that he was considered a Marxist, but he was against the Soviet Union. I thought, wow, how could you do that?
la sociologie,
The Soviet Union is supposed to be Marxist.
mais en même
He's a
temps,
Marxist philosopher,
Sartre s'engage tout entier dans
How
la
does
lutte
that
pour
work?
la paix et l'indépendance du
but
pays.
of course I could see how.
Il a accepté de présider le tribunal Boisseau, qui doit juger les crimes de guerre au Vietnam.
I don't know why these French philosophers smoked so much. They're always just, and it's killing them, right?
Bien.
Naturellement.
De vérité, de dire que c'est fort. Un danger nucléaire certain, un danger de guerre générale nucléaire certain.
So being in nothingness, it's about this big. They're all big books for some reason. Although, if you're interested in Peter Sloterdijk, are we almost finished? No. Oh, okay. Are we almost finished?
No, we said 10 minutes.
Oh, I just spelled it. There he is. So he's actually Dutch, Peter Sloterdijk. His book is Rage and Time. He's got other books too, but the one that's of the same sort here, this one is really, really good, In the World Interior Capital, which is a dumb translation, because it's not really world interior, it's Weltanschauung, which means, right, you've heard the word Weltanschauung, it means, we usually translate it as your world view, not world interior. That's just really weird. However, it is a good book. But here's Rage and Time. So that's his book that's part of this kind of sequence, right? But Sloterdijk, we'll pick video for you to see it. Thing is, he doesn't speak English at all. far as I know.
Glücksfälle. Das hätte alles auch genauso gut ganz anders gehen können.
You like the hair?
He looks scared.
Ich ordne dieses Ereignis in einem ganz anderen Erzählrahmen, weil ich versuche zu erzählen, wie die Menschen seit der Renaissance in Europa einen Versuch unternommen haben, sich von der Diktatur der genealogischen Beziehung zu emanzipieren. Nur immer mehr Menschen ohne Herkunft, in Anführungszeichen, versuchen sich
I was watching a video of Slavoj Žižek the other day where he's talking about the crisis with the migrants, and he says, you know, we do too much with respect to saying everybody's open, you know, everybody should be respected, you know, everybody can move in and so on. He says, no, we should have more distance. We should have communities where you have kind of a culture that's pretty steady. And then outside of that, you have these other cultures. So you can still respect other people, but we don't have to be all mushed in with our general culture kind of being destroyed. So that strikes me as kind of a pushback, you know, against what happened mostly last year. But as you look at the Europeans, they're all pushing back against putting up boundaries, saying no more, go back to Turkey. Of course, Turkey is sending them back to Syria. Oh my goodness! So he's very interesting. Also, he had a TV show that was kind of like Charlie Rose, where he did interviews in Germany. So even though he's Dutch, he was mostly in Germany. So a lot of his videos are all. So for example.
Voilà. Alors je présente notre conférencier d'aujourd'hui. Il s'agit du philosophe Peter Sloterdijk. Il est né en 1947 à Karlsruhe. Il a fait ses études de philosophie à Munich. Il les a terminées à l'université de Hambourg avec une thèse de doctorat sur l'autobiographie. Actuellement, il occupe la chaire de philosophie et d'esthétique à l'école de Hochschule für Gestaltung de Karlsruhe. Et ses publications commencent à être tout à fait connues en France, en Allemagne et aux États-Unis. Il a publié un des premiers ouvrages qu'on a eu Critique de la raison cynique.
The main one.
Je crois même à la fin des années 80. Un gros, énorme ouvrage tout à fait essentiel qui est paru aux éditions Christian Bourgois. Vous avez aussi
So I'll end with which one should we pick here? I think that he's in English in this one, so let's. Being happy. Should be it.
Original subject. How to change the world. Answer is by becoming the subjective part of the consequences of a local event.
Local event.
Becoming the subjective part of the consequences of local event. That's so different. To fall in love can be change the world. But precisely to become a subjective part of the consequences of a local event.
Become part of the consequences of the local event, the subjective part of the consequences of the local event.
Freedom and discipline. Not an opposition, but the point where to be obstinate to do something
Obstinate.
is the same thing.
Do you need my translation of his really impoverished English?
And the invention, by the invention of a new form of happiness, which is a victory against the potency of death. That is the potency of the patient to stay in your place.
Couldn't figure out what he said there.
At a very important moment of the French Revolution,
Really important moment.
late French Revolution, one of the great actors and
What is
thinkers
it?
of this
Actors
period
and
of
singers.
Saint-Just
Saint-Just?
has said, happiness
That's the name of the
is a
person.
new
Saint-Just.
ideal in Europe.
He's famous.
Happiness
He's famous
is a
actor
new
and singer.
ideal.
Not in our country, maybe.
Maybe
Yeah.
we must create the
Oh, yeah,
conditions
no.
to say the same.
Oh, yes.
We know that something is changing in
So-
the world when we experiment that happiness is not the predetermined goal of the movement.
So there are a couple other great continental philosophers that I haven't mentioned at all. Gadamer is dead, but Habermas. So here's a German. This is.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Banchoff. I'm director of the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs here at Georgetown.
Habermas has a.
I'm delighted to welcome you to this year's Berkeley
damaged
Center lecture
mouth,
with Jürgen
so
Habermas. on the
That's why
topic
he
Myth and
has
Ritual.
kind of the side of his jaw looks.
Thank you all for coming. This is it's quite a crowd. The result of one email and a lot of word of mouth. It's the kind of event we like to run.
But Habermas was a
Just a word
student of
before we get
Heidegger.
started about the center and about the lecture. The Berkeley Center has been around now 5.5 years. We're part of a university-wide effort to advance the interdisciplinary study of religion and promote interreligious understanding. Through teaching, research, and outreach, at the center we explore religious and ethical questions as they
Okay, moving ahead to.
Have this opportunity to welcome Professor Habermas to our campus this evening. I look forward to his insights and to the discussion that they will generate on this campus. Now please join me.
Habermas
in
is a
welcoming
pragmatist.
Professor Jürgen Habermas.
But he's very much continental. So I think it's interesting that a lot of the contemporary German philosophers have been very influenced by American pragmatism, most likely because of after the war or the Reconstruction, etc.
Mr. President, Professor Banchoff, thank you for this warm reception. I'm glad to be here once
He
more.
has a problem with his jaw. He
I
always
have
did. It was
been,
from like birth,
intimidated. This has
or
the
somewhere
feelings
really young.
of,
He's
something more ceremonial, but I can assure you I have only a normal paper to present, and when we speak today as sociologists or anthropologists of religion, we employ an inclusive concept that encompasses all possible conceptions of faith and practices which involve a confrontation with extraordinary forces of salvation and disaster. The Californian guru and the Native American medicine man command the same interest as the Old Testament prophets or the Chinese wise men. When we speak of religion as laypersons, however, we have in mind first and foremost the major world religions that.
So, are there any great philosophers that I've neglected to mention any time during the course? I hope I've covered at least all the big ones that are out there.
What do you think about Michael Savage? You ever read any of his books?
No.
Very good philosopher. Still alive. Radio talk shows. Dr. Michael Savage.
Is that right?
And
7. The corruption in the United States of America has never been at this peak. Never. Under this monster in the White House, the corruption is now so out of control that a story came out today that summarizes it all. Pelosi's husband, you know who she is, don't you? Old Nancy, the green energy bumbler
He lives in
Pelosi.
San Francisco.
Well, the article, if it's
He
true,
does, yeah.
if it's true, no, I don't know. It came out today in
He's not liberal at all. He's way on the
freebeacon.com
other
based
side.
upon
He was,
congressional
he got his
financial
PhD at
disclosures.
Berkeley. He used to be.
If it's true, it's bigger than Martha
He did
Stewart.
huge,
And you know what happened to Martha
Did an
Stewart?
opposite of Nozick.
But then, of course,
Oh,
there was
actually,
no
the
President
thing is,
Obama and
Nozick
Loretta
was
Lynch in
very,
power
very
at the
liberal.
time. Pelosi's husband invested in solar for weeks before lucrative expansion.
Back in Vietnam days. And then
Now, I'll read the
goes to
story
school
to you, because if it's true, it's
about
hugely
absolute
important in this election.
That's kind of how they do it.
Because I'm going to ask you a loaded question. Which of the candidates is more likely to stop the corruption of this type that you see with Pelosi? And by the way, if you think it's limited to Pelosi, you're
But his books are
mistaken.
very philosophical.
Take a little look at Dianne Feinstein's nepotism and insider dealings, according to so many sources that are...
I guess that's all. So what did you think of the course? Was this worth your effort?
Yeah.
Easy A? But did you get anything out of it, like that you could use as you go forward? Clearly a beard is a good thing.
The stuff I found the most interesting was religion. That's just
Well, that, I mean, I tend to emphasize that myself because of the concern with the big picture. All of these, in a sense, are an attempt to give you that big picture, and you'd essentially become a believer of that meta-narrative if you found the books
I've already
persuasive.
seen it. Yep. Thanks.
I found that interesting, like existentialism and narcissism. The other ones were like, they don't exist if it's in what you taste. They don't exist if you're observing it at the time. I found that really interesting. So,
Well, that's a kind of a physics issue. Yeah.
I like to go and watch that video about that guy that was gonna get hanged. I remember.
Oh, yeah.
And that was really weird. He got like he imagined that the rope broke or something.
Oh, the bridge broke.
And then
Bridge incident at something.
Owl Bridge, right?
Owl Bridge, yeah.
And I also like what was it? Wagner and Chopin.
Schopenhauer?
Yeah, I like it. And Nietzsche and
My daughter and I watched Roberto Devereux last night at the Century 16. So it's the Met HD opera of Donizetti's opera about Queen Elizabeth. And well, the thing is, you do have to be trained to deal with coloratura singing, because that's all bel canto. The whole, it's kind of like an opportunity to have a tenor sing bel canto and a baritone sing bel cantor, and a tenor and a baritone sing a duet. It's just one combination after another until you get like basically all the possible combinations with a soprano, mezzo soprano, tenor, whole works. And of course, at the very end, Queen Elizabeth is deadly pale looking, all white pasty, white hair, all upset because she's just had her boyfriend's head chopped off, etc. So,
No more questions?
Yeah, if you would like give me you could take the student surveys, please do those. And I actually read all that stuff, but you could also just, for today's quiz question, email me your thoughts on how I can make the class better.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
For the final exam, because I've done all three, not for, yeah, the third test. So do you want me to?
You can turn them in as soon as you get
Okay.
them.
Because I need to.
I need them all before
Thursday.
grades are due, of course,
When-
because, and I'd like to get them in time for me to read them
Yeah.
and so on.
I know I'm late with mine, but
Oh.
my wife just deployed, so
Oh.
I spent a lot of time with her before she left. She's in Germany.
Oh.
We'll all be going next month.
Oh.
For 3 months, yeah.
So cool.
To go hang out with her.
Are you practicing your German before?
A little bit. I know Scheisse.
You know, it was so funny. We always used to get Schiessen and Scheissen mixed up.
Yeah.
You know, so we'd be at the range, you know, and there'd be Germans there. And we'd be talking about Scheissen instead of Schiessen.
Yeah.
And they'd always laugh. But we knew we were doing it, so that was good.
I'll see you tomorrow night.
Alrighty, you don't shit at targets. You shoot at targets.
Well, if your DVD doesn't come in time, by like Wednesday night, email me and I'll go pick it up.
Okay.
If you don't
So
have
I
a
guess that's the one where
You mean-
Blockbuster, Cat has a Blockbuster.
Blockbuster, I can go because I'm, or I can borrow it from a friend because she has it, so you don't have to spend any money. Because it costs like $1.
Well,
It
I
doesn't
did
have-
order it via Amazon, and
It should be.
I paid full price in the hopes that it would get here fast. Even though they promised May 2nd, it always arrives before then.
Yeah, if it comes.
So
if
it could even come like this weekend.
Yeah, if it does, let me know. So.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I ordered, in order to get free shipping, I ordered 3 movies. I ordered Jurassic World,
Yeah.
Irrational Man, although I don't know if I really should have ordered that. And then the other one was the new Jedi, Star Wars movie.
Oh, Force Awakens. Yes.
So I
Okay. We
have
should have
this
watched that. But anyway. Okay. Goodbye.
Okay. Oops.